Bibles to Ezra chapter 8. Ezra chapter 8. And we're looking at a pretty good chunk of the text this morning. It's going to be 8 through verse 23. Chapter 8, verse 1 through verse 23. And let me begin by reading the text. These are the heads of their fathers' houses, and this is the genealogy of those who went up with me from Babylonia and the reign of Artaxerxes the king. Of the son of Phinehas, Gershom. Of the son of Ithamar, Daniel. Of the sons of David, Hattush. Of the sons of Shechaniah, who was one of the sons of Parosh, Zechariah, with whom were registered 150 men. Of the sons of Pahath, Moab, Elihonai, the son of Zerahiah, and with him 200 men. Of the sons of Zattu, Shechaniah, the son of Jahaziel, and with him 300 men. Of the sons of Adin, Ebed, the son of Jonathan, and with him 50 men. Of the sons of Elam, Jeshiah, the son of Athaliah, and with him 70 men. Of the sons of Shephatiah, Zebediah, the son of Michael, and with him 80 men. Of the sons of Joab, Obadiah, the son of Jehiel, and with him 218 men. Of the sons of Bani, Shelomith, the son of Josephiah, and with him 160 men. Of the sons of Bebai, Zechariah, the son of Bebai, and with him 28 men. Of the sons of Azgad, Johanan, the son of Hakatan, and with him 110 men. Of the sons of Adonikim, those who came later, their names being Eliphelet, Jeul, and Shemaiah, and with them 60 men. Of the sons of Bigvai, Uthai, and Zakur, and with them 70 men. I gathered them to the river that runs to Ahava, and there we camped 3 days. As I reviewed the people and the priests, I found there none of the sons of Levi. Then I sent Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarib, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Mushallam, leading men, and for Joarib and Elnathan, who were men of insight, and sent them to Iddo, the leading man, at the place of Casiphia, telling them what to say to Iddo and his brothers and the temple servants at the place of Casiphia, namely, to send us ministers for the house of our God. And by the good hand of our God on us, they brought us a man of discretion, of the sons of Mali, the son of Levi, son of Israel, namely, Sherebiah, with his sons and kinsmen, 18, also Hashabiah, and with him Jeshiah of the sons of Merari, and the kinsmen of their sons 20, besides 220 of the temple servants, whom David and his officials had set apart to attend the Levites. These were all mentioned by name. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him a safe journey for ourselves, our children, and our goods. For I was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy on our way, since we had told the king, the hand of our God is for good on all who seek him, and the power of his wrath is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and implored our God for this, and he listened to our entreaty. This is the word of the Lord. As we get into Ezra 8, we encounter yet another series of genealogies. As with previous genealogies, these two will also prove to be very important to the story. So don't get hung up on all the names. What we're getting here is important insight into the strategic thinking and the mind of Ezra. Remember that Ezra has been commissioned by King Artaxerxes to take another group of Jews back to Jerusalem. They had been given a very special and important mandate. Ezra and his team will be responsible for providing for both the spiritual and the material needs of the people of Israel. As such, Ezra would need to be very intentional and strategic with how he organized his efforts. This means that as a leader, Ezra must ensure that he had all of the right people accompanying him on this mission. In chapter 7, we learned that the king had gifted Ezra and his delegation with significant wealth and resources for the task. However, if you're trying to execute a strategic initiative, it's not enough to have money and materials. You also need the right men. So you need money, materials, and men. What we learn in chapter 7 is that Ezra had the money and the materials. Let's go back to chapter 7 and look at the decree of the king in verse 13. Let's just take a look at this by way of review. Chapter 7, verse 13. I make a decree that any one of the people of Israel or their priests or Levites in my kingdom who freely offers to go to Jerusalem may go with you, for you are sent by the king and his 7 counselors to make inquiries about Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your hand, and also to carry the silver and gold that the king and his counselors have freely offered to the God of Israel, whose dwelling is in Jerusalem. With all the silver and gold you shall find in the whole people of the province of Babylonia, and with the freewill offerings of the people and the priests vowed willingly for the house of their God that is in Jerusalem. With this money then you shall with all diligence buy bulls, rams, and lambs with their grain offerings and their drink offerings, and you shall offer them on the altar of the house of your God that is in Jerusalem. Whatever seems good to you and your brothers to do with the rest of the silver and gold, you may do according to the will of your God. The vessels that have been given you for the service of the house of your God, you shall deliver before the God of Jerusalem. And whatever else is required for the house of your God, which it falls to you to provide, you may provide it out of the king's treasury. And I, Artaxerxes the king, make a decree to all the treasurers in the province beyond the river. Whatever Ezra the priest, the scribe of the law of the God of heaven, requires of you, let it be done with all diligence, up to 100 talents of silver, 100 cores of wheat, 100 baths of wine, 100 baths of oil, and salt without prescribing how much. Whatever is decreed by the God of heaven, let it be done in full for the house of the God of heaven, lest his wrath be against the realm of the king and his sons. We also notify you that it shall not be lawful to impose tribute, custom, or toll on any one of the priests, the Levites, the singers, the doorkeepers, the temple servants, or other servants of this house of God. Period. That is a huge laundry list of money and materials. In addition, Ezra had been vested with authority, all the authority that was necessary to complete the task for which he was sent. That said, in order to be a leader, you have to have followers. By definition, right? In order to be a leader, you have to have followers. So then chapter 8 begins with Ezra's prudent gathering of all the necessary personnel. Yet, and I want to make this a very important point here. At no time is there any indication that Ezra was trying to do all of these things in his own strength. On the contrary, at every important point we come to in this text, we find Ezra giving credit to God for his authorship of these circumstances. This brings me to the big idea of the text this morning. The big idea is this: the hand of our God is for good on all who seek him. The hand of our God is for good on all who seek him. You may recall the last couple of sermons I mentioned that this phrase was going to be central to our understanding of the entire book. We see it appear in different forms over and over again throughout the book, particularly in relation to the return of Ezra and his delegation to Jerusalem. Why do I point this out? Well, I think it's important for us to see this because it can be easy, especially in our culture, to think that we're out on an island. It's easy to think that if something good is going to happen, that we need to make it happen. Yet what we are treated to here is a sentiment that is strikingly different from the one which is so prevalent in our own culture. Now, it also bears repeating that Ezra's acknowledgement and reliance upon God does not relieve him of the task of being a good leader. Ezra's not looking at God and saying, well, you're totally in control. You're the sovereign king, so I'm just going to sit here on my hands and wait for you to organize this delegation. I'm just going to sit here and hope that it all just somehow comes together because God is so good. No, Ezra is responsible. He takes action. And the action he takes is met with God's provision. Do you see how that works? The action he takes is met with God's provision. Ezra does what is in his control to do. It's not like Ezra cries out for Jesus to take the wheel and then jumps out of a moving vehicle. No, Ezra does the work. He has prepared himself by studying the scripture. He has received the blessing and the provision of the king. And as we will see, he is organizing and rallying the people. However, all along the way, Ezra has not lost sight of the fact that it is ultimately the Lord who is in control. It is ultimately the Lord who is in control. Our problem is that so often, when we look at the circumstances of our lives, things don't appear to be working out in a way that would be beneficial to us or those around us. And by that, we conclude that somehow God is not in control. So how is it then that we could come to a sane conclusion that he is in control when things in our world seem like they're so far out of control? In fact, when you hear people arguing against the existence of God, the argument that they so often use is that if God was all-powerful and all good, why is there evil and suffering? Don't you hear people say something like that? Well, he is in control. And the problem is that our reference point is so small. We have like this little pinprick insight into reality, and we think we've figured it out. There's a great poem I want to share with you, which I think powerfully illustrates the point. It's called Life is But a Weaving. It's also called the Tapestry Poem. It goes like this. My life is but a weaving between my God and me. I cannot choose the colors. He weaveth steadily. Ofttimes he weaveth sorrow, and I in foolish pride forget he sees the upper, and I the underside. Not till the loom is silent and the shuttles cease to fly will God unroll the canvas and reveal the reason why. The dark threads are as needful in the weaver's skillful hand as the threads of gold and silver in the pattern that he has planned. He knows, he loves, he cares. Nothing this truth can dim. He gives the very best to those who leave the choice to him. Did you hear that? Down here, we can only see the underside of the canvas. We see the tangled and knotted thread. But God sees things from a different perspective. And it's a perspective which we will one day share, but not yet. So then it is best for us now to leave the hidden and the secret things to the Lord. Deuteronomy 29:29. The things which are revealed belong to us, and they are our responsibility. But the hidden things belong to Him. What we do know is that the Lord has authority over all things, over time and over our lives. What we know is that He is good and that He desires our good and His glory. And while I suspect that we may not always be comfortable with the decisions He makes, I trust they will ultimately bring about an end result that is far superior to anything that I could ever orchestrate. The problem is that I think I'm a better weaver. I think I'm better at needlepoint than God. And if I were to do it, both the underside and the upper side would be a mess. And here, what I'm telling you today is that you're not on an island alone. You're not forced to fend for yourself. God is with you. He promised to never leave or forsake you. You believe that? God was with His people while they were in exile. And He's going to remain with them as they return to Jerusalem. And He's orchestrating all of it. He orchestrated the exile, and He's orchestrating the return. I suspect that some of you are in a more exilic phase of life. And things feel a little bit rotten. But our God is not a God who is subject to death and decay. He's a resurrecting God. He's a conquering death kind of God. He's a God who comes out of exile and brings life. He comes out of the grave and He ascends to heaven. And we see this illustrated very clearly in this text. Amongst all of the names and the genealogies. I'm going to break some of this down for you this morning. That leads me to the question that I think the text asks and answers, and that is, how was God's hand upon His people? How was God's hand upon His people? Well, first, God's hand is revealed by the gathering of leaders. Look again at verses 1 through 14. Do you see all of those names there? You see all of those names? Those names are very important to the story. I want to repeat myself here. The genealogies of Scripture are no less important than any other words that appear in the text. All of it is God-breathed and is therefore profitable for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness. There are no footnotes or asterisks at the end of 1 Timothy 3:16 where Paul says, with exception of genealogies. All of it is God-breathed, down in the footnotes, except the genealogies. Those you can just jump over. No, it doesn't say that. That said, they can be a little more tricky to work with because the meaningfulness within the context of the passage may not be as immediately identifiable. you read a name and you're like, okay, who cares? That means nothing to me. As if it means nothing because you don't make a connection with it. I'm sorry, team, you got to do a little bit more work than that to see the meaning. That said, the first thing I'd like to point you out to is the phrase, these are the heads of their fathers' houses. In other words, those whose genealogies are listed were leaders in Israel. They were members of important families who had influence. Not only that, but if you compare the names of these families to those who made the first trip following the decree of Cyrus in 537 BC, you'll find many similarities. So there's this next wave of exiles are following up with this, most of them the same families as the first wave. The second thing to note is related to the particulars of some of the names that are mentioned. Right off the bat in verse 2, we see Gershom of the sons of Phinehas and Daniel of the sons of Ithamar. I'm like, okay. Ithamar is first mentioned in Exodus chapter 6, verse 23, and is listed as one of the four sons of Aaron the priest, Moses' brother. Which means that Daniel, who is mentioned as a descendant of Ithamar, is related to Ezra. They're relatives. How do I know this? Because back in chapter 7, we read Ezra's genealogy, and we saw how Ezra was also a descendant of Aaron and a member of his priestly lineage. So these guys are connected. Now, Phinehas, who's mentioned here, was the son of Eleazar and the grandson of Aaron the high priest. So then, Gershom is also descended from the Aaronic line. So these three guys are related. They're all of the line of Aaron, who was the high priest of Israel. This is really important because it communicates that Ezra was assembling a kind of liturgical dream team. Right? We think of Marvel comics, like we're putting a team together. Right? These guys were the best. They were the most reputable, most brilliant teachers at that time. And they're accompanying Ezra on his trip. The Lord had surrounded Ezra with capable men who were going to support his efforts. And there's a lot in this section. But there's one more name that especially stands out. And I'm going to share with you a little bit of background about this name. This guy, Hattush. It's a funny name. You can say it if you want. Hattush. Hattush. Hattush, we are told, is one of the sons of David. All right, church, who was David? David was a great king in Israel, right? That's King David. He was descended from the line of King David. He was the king about which God said his throne would be eternal. Yet here is this no-name guy who appears among those who would join Ezra in this return from exile to Jerusalem. Interestingly, too, the name Hattush means gathered, if you were to translate it in English. Interesting. Let's go deeper. I love this insight from Dale Ralph Davis in his commentary. He writes this, quote, "The writer, however, does not go ballistic about the presence of a Davidic descendant here. The emphasis is muted. But he does mention him. Perhaps we can imagine a scenario, something like a Louis L'Amour Western. thugs and ruffians have carried off a young lady to hold her for ransom. The hero of our story pursues, trying to pick up on their trail. Then he comes upon a piece of red scarf, a scarf he knows belongs to the girl. It is caught, seemingly by accident, on a mesquite shrub. But he divines that she deliberately snagged it there so her rescuer would know she had been that way. Simply a sign that she is apparently alive and that our hero is on the right path. Perhaps Hattush fulfills that role here. He's a sign that even in the drab days of these post-exilic years, the line of David is still intact. Is the mention of Hattush, a son of David, meant as a hint that the Davidic covenant, though currently eclipsed, is not dead and buried, that God has not repealed the promise of 2 Samuel chapter 7? It's interesting. There is, even in the mention of Hattush, a death and resurrection motif being played out in the scripture. The Davidic line, though eclipsed, is not dead. There will be a Davidic king who sits on the throne forever. And his name is Jesus Christ. Hattush is Jesus' ancestor, and had he not come to Jerusalem with Ezra, there's no telling what would become of God's promise. Now consider how pregnant these 6 words are of the sons of David, Hattush. And they say there's nothing in the genealogies. The Lord orchestrated the gathering, the Hattush, such that it would include in seed form the redemption of all of creation. You may never look at genealogies the same way again, I hope. Isn't that beautiful? And there's so much more there. I invite you to go and study these names and see how significant they are. It's amazing. Next, we see God's hand revealed by the provision of ministers. In verse 15 through 20. Let's read real quick, verse 15 through 20. I gathered them to the river that runs to Ahava, and there we camped 3 days. As I reviewed the people and the priests, I found there none of the sons of Levi. Then I sent for Eleazar, Ariel, Shemaiah, Elnathan, Jarib, Elnathan, Nathan, Zechariah, and Meshullam, leading men, and for Joiarib and Elnathan, who were men of insight, and sent them to Iddo, the leading man, at the place of Casaphia, telling them what to say to Iddo and his brothers and the temple servants at the place Casaphia, namely, to send us ministers for the house of God. And by the good hand of our God on us, they brought us a man of discretion of the sons of Mahli, the son of Levi, the son of Israel, namely, Sherebiah, and his sons and kinsmen 18, also Hashabiah, and with him Jeshiah of the sons of Merari, the kinsmen and their sons 20, besides 220 of the temple servants whom David and his officials had set apart to attend the Levites. These were all mentioned by name. Notice what happens next. Ezra's getting ready to set out on his long journey back to Jerusalem, and he gathers everyone to this staging point near a river. And when everyone arrives, Ezra starts to take stock of who's there, and he notices that there aren't any Levites. Ruh-roh. There aren't any Levites. That's a problem. Why? Because it was the Levites who were responsible for taking care of the temple. They basically acted as servant priests within the precincts of the temple. You needed Levites if you were going to have a functioning temple. So Ezra's getting ready to take this whole horde of people back down to Jerusalem, and they don't even have the people necessary to keep the temple going. That's an issue. So what does Ezra do? He gathers a delegation of men who were themselves leaders to a place called Casaphia, where there was a man called Iddo. Now here again we're told in verse 18 that God's hand was upon them and that the Lord provided servants. Yet it was Ezra who took account of who was with them and when they prepared to leave. It was Ezra who put together a delegation of leaders. It was Ezra who gave these leaders directions as to where to go to find the Levites. And it was Ezra who told the leaders what to say when they got there. In his commentary, Derek Thomas writes this, quote, "For such a journey as this, a leader would need to demonstrate careful planning to mobilize and organize, manage and motivate a disparate group so as to ensure a unified vision. What would such planning entail? Solid spiritual foundations to begin with. Faith and planning, just as salt and pepper, belong together." Did you hear that? Faith and planning, just as salt and pepper, belong together. Zeal without careful planning leads to eccentricity and lopsidedness, not because God doesn't honor zeal, but because rewarding the bizarre is not his way. Careful planners will be seen by some to be boring bureaucrats lacking in vision and adventure. Boring bureaucrats lacking in vision and adventure. And Ezra's careful numbering of the group, identifying lopsidedness by the weakness of particular sections, the Levites, for example, is typical of a civil servant. Some might say, and show his lack of trust in God. Some perhaps were ready to leave immediately. They would count the 3 days spent by the river or the canal that runs to Ahava as wasted time when they could have been many miles into the journey. Did you hear that? It's not a failure of vision or trust of God to ensure that you have what you need before you set out to do what God has called you to accomplish. Just because you've discerned that the Lord wants you to do something doesn't mean that he wants you to do it now. Just because you've discerned that the Lord wants you to do something doesn't mean he wants you to do it now. It may be that he desires that you prepare yourself for the journey so that you have what you need. In this case, Ezra discerns that he doesn't have enough Levites to get the job done once they arrive in Jerusalem. Therefore, it is better to slow down and wait rather than to plow ahead. Some of us get so excited about the vision. Some of us get so excited about the thing that we want to do that we don't stop and ask whether we are prepared to do it. I'm preaching to myself right now. I'm like, I see this big thing. I'm like, all right, here we go. Let's do this. It's like, whoa. My wife is laughing right now. It's like, whoa, hold your horses. Slow down. Settle. We need to make sure we have all the necessary pieces in place to accomplish the thing that you have this great vision to do. Not downplaying the importance of the vision. Not downplaying the importance of what it is that God has called you to do, but you also have to make sure you're waiting on the Lord and for his timing. Ezra's willingness to wait on the Lord for his provision pays off in a big way, doesn't it? They get all of the priests that they were going to need to do the job. Meanwhile, you got these guys at camp going, when are we going to leave? It's time to go. You told us we were going to Jerusalem and we're just sitting here. And now because of your bureaucratic whatever, we got to sit and wait. We could be miles down the road now. But but it's important that you have everything you need to get the job done. Finally, God's hand is revealed as being upon his people by deliverance from enemies. By deliverance from enemies. Look at verse 21. Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river, Ahava, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek him for a safe journey for ourselves, our children, and all our goods. For I was ashamed to ask the king for a band of soldiers and horsemen to protect us against the enemy on our way, since we had told the king, the hand of our God is for good on all who seek him, and the power of his wrath is against all who forsake him. So we fasted and implored our God for this, and he listened to our entreaty. Now this is great because I can imagine all the people ready to go. You know, they have all their cars and their SUVs all packed up to the brim, right? Babies are crying. Kids are running around like hooligans. Because it wasn't just men who went, it was all their families. So you had everything, this was just a mass of people by a river with infants and children. So all this stuff is happening. They're waiting for days. And Ezra's like, oh, shoot. We don't have Levites. Okay? So their SUVs, they're all packed up. The kids are running around crazy. They look out on the horizon and they see a caravan of vehicles full of fellow Jews ready to join the convoy. Here come the Levites. Filled with anticipation and excitement, they start to take their vehicles out of park and put them in drive, and they put their foot on the gas when out of the blue they hear a voice. All right, now that everybody's finally here, we're going to have a fast. We need to stop and we need to fast and pray. So everybody put your vehicles back in park. We're going to fast and pray, and we're going to make sure we're spiritually ready before we head out on this long, arduous, and dangerous journey. Can't you hear the collective sighs of the people? Like, oh, fast and pray. We should have already been on the road. Like, I have it marked out on Google Maps. I know all the gas stations where I need to stop on the way. We should have already been on the road by now, Ezra. And we're going to fast. Clearly, God is with us. He sent us the Levites, right? So that must mean he's with us. He's put it into the heart of the king to provide us with gold and silver. I mean, that's evidence of God's provision, right? We have all the materials that we need to beautify the temple and to rebuild the city. We have all the skilled people necessary to execute the plan. What's the holdup? Ezra responds, well, I told the king that we weren't going to need any soldiers to protect us on our journey. Suddenly, everybody looks back at Ezra. You said, what? And he responds, yeah, I told him that God was with us and that he would protect us and execute wrath against our enemies. Huh. Okay. Like he couldn't do that with some soldiers? And then in verse 23, we read this very plain, matter-of-fact statement. So we fasted and implored our God for this, and he listened to our entreaty. Church, it wasn't as if Ezra did not trust God. The fasting and prayer was a demonstration of faith, not a lack of trust. I'm going to say that again. The fasting and prayer was a demonstration of faith, not a lack of trust. Ezra believed so strongly that the Lord was with him that he realized nothing in heaven or on earth or under the earth would derail this exilic return to Jerusalem. And at every point along the way, the Lord revealed in no uncertain terms that his hand was upon the people. Some of you have even experienced something like this at some point in your life or another. It's as if every door is open. Have you ever experienced something like that? It's like every door is open. It's as if there's absolutely no obstacles. It's like a red carpet is rolled out in front of you. Such was the case with respect to this particular event. Every challenge they faced, it was like, boom, God answered. God answered. God answered. He provided. He made a way. Now, it needs to be said that the presence of obstacles does not necessarily mean that you are outside the will of God. Okay? Because some people look at obstacles and they say, well, I wouldn't be experiencing this if God was with me. That's not necessarily true. However, in this situation, Ezra saw very clearly how God intended to lead him to Jerusalem to bring about the restoration of the city and the worship that would happen in the temple. Which leads me to the application and how I think this is relevant to us as a church. And the application is this, that you would trust the Lord as he leads. That you would trust the Lord as he leads. I'm not ignorant to the fact that this is often easier said than done. The pastor's up there telling me I need to trust the Lord. Well, if he knew what I was going through, if he realized all the things that were happening in my life, maybe he wouldn't be so flippant about saying, trust the Lord. No, I would say the same thing, okay? I would say the same thing. And I get the reality is often more complicated than the theory. However, it should also be said that there can be no progress in any worthwhile venture unless you begin with trust. You must first believe before you can do anything else. You can't put one foot in front of the other until you believe that there is a worthwhile destination to which you're walking. This is a necessary and inextricable component of faith, trust. You have to trust the Lord as he leads. You must believe that the good shepherd is going to take care of you. Now, Ezra clearly embodied this kind of faith. He trusted God. He knew the hand of God was upon him and the people, and he was willing to take a risk and walk out into the unknown. We're going to take a long trip. It's going to be very hard, but we trust that God is with us. Ladies and gentlemen, there are very many unknowns in front of us. However, we do know one thing. Namely, who is leading. You see, it doesn't matter what you know about the future, as long as you know the one who's leading you into that future. And we know who's leading, and he is a good shepherd who gives his life up for his sheep. We know he is good. We know he loves us. We know he is in control. We know that though everything may look all tangled and in a knotted mess, from his eternal vantage point, it is a beautiful tapestry full of color and contrast, which when completed will glorify him forever. That we know. That we trust. Let's pray.